We are now live, everybody.
What kind of registration did we get?
Dun, dun, dun. I didn't check. Last time I looked the other day, we had over 30, and I was thrilled to see.
Excellent.
Yeah. We do have an attendee who has joined us. I want to say welcome. We do plan to get started at 3:30. I'm your local history librarian, Rick Hansen, and we're using the Zoom webinar format. So as an attendee, you cannot see or hear each other. Just keep that in mind and welcome. Make yourself comfortable. We'll get started at 3:30. Hello and welcome to our attendees just joining us. My name is Rick Hansen. I'm your local history librarian, and we are connecting from many different locations with Zoom. Now, the Zoom webinar format might be new to some of you, but this format allows us to accommodate our great audience. So take a moment, if you can, explore some of the features of Zoom on your screen, and you should be able to locate a Q&A section. If you have any questions or comments, please submit them there. And we do have time at the end of our presentations to read some of them to our storytellers. We do plan to get started in just a few minutes at 3:30. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and please make yourself comfortable. Hi, everybody. I see many more attendees coming in this afternoon. I want to welcome you to Tellabration. We do plan to get started in just a few minutes, but I just wanted to make a little introductory note about Zoom. We are using the Zoom webinar format this afternoon, and this will better help us accommodate our great audience. And that just means that we cannot see or hear you as attendees, and you cannot see or hear each other. But just take a moment, if you can, explore some of the features of Zoom on your screen, whether that's a mobile screen or a laptop, and you will locate a Q&A section, and you can submit any questions, comments, feedback you have during the presentation, and we will try to get to those and ask our storytellers at the very end. In the meantime, we do plan to get started shortly. Thank you very much. And hello again, a warm welcome to everyone just joining us. My name is Rick Hansen. I'm your local history librarian at the Greenwich Library, and we are connecting from many different locations with Zoom. Now with this format, the webinar format, it helps us better accommodate our great audience, and we cannot see or hear you as attendees, and you cannot see or hear each other. Now this afternoon's presentation is expected to run about 1 hour. And again, please send in any questions or comments you might have through the Q&A section that you'll locate on your screen, and we'll plan to review. We are recording, but remember, we cannot see or hear you, and you cannot see or hear each other as attendees. Now, the Greenwich Library is thrilled to welcome you to Tellabration, a celebration of the oral tradition, a mammoth storytelling event made up of storytelling happenings all over the world. Its purpose is to introduce adults as well as young adults to the pleasures of the oral art of storytelling. So many thanks to the Connecticut Storytelling Center based at Connecticut College in New London. Tom Callinan and Carolyn Stearns will be performing stories and songs separately about Connecticut and New England history. Tom Callinan's entertaining and informative narrative style brings audiences of all ages into the performance in catchy choruses, interesting anecdotes, and an assortment of musical instruments. Tom was Connecticut's first state troubadour, and Carolyn Stearns has a passion for the past and an extraordinary ability to connect with groups of all ages. One reviewer said, "You can actually put yourself right in the story, and storytelling of this caliber is an art." Without any further delay, I'd like to ask my colleague and librarian, Lauren Mendoza, to read the Tellabration Proclamation and a few introductory remarks. Lauren, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rick. Hi, my name is Lauren Mendoza. Many of you may know me from my position as a children's programmer here at the Greenwich Library. But here today, I'm here to tell you about Tellabration. Tellabration was actually created right here in Connecticut. It was the brainchild of J.G. Paw Paw Pinkerton, a very well-known and well-loved storyteller. The first Tellabration was held here in Connecticut in 1988. It was a group of 3, and they have grown since then. JG's original vision was a one night, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, one night, one day, to celebrate storytelling for adults. Since then, its overwhelming popularity has meant that it has expanded well beyond this one day and into many different states, many different countries, and the entire month of November. So now, each Tellabration has in common the reading of our proclamation. So here we go. Proclamation. In the name of storytelling, November 2020 is hereby proclaimed to be Tellabration, the worldwide event of storytelling. At this very moment, across 6 continents, in 40 states and 9 countries, from Sacramento to Savannah, from Boise to Barcelona, from California's Golden Gate Bridge to Connecticut's Greenwich Library. In over 300 audiences are gathered for this spectacular storytelling event. So without further delay, enjoy and anticipation. Let the stories begin. And now I'll turn you over to Tom Callinan.
Tens of thousands every day pass through the Constitution State in their rat race between Boston and New York. To them it's just 200 miles of winding highway snake, or the trains along the Northeast Corridor. But the thruway skirts communities the railroad tracks divide, so you never feel the pulse of any town. For commuters, the view tends to be homogenized. See this place, you've got to look around. In Mystic, there's a seaport, the village, and the ships at the aquarium. Beluga whales and dolphins doing flips at state parks and beaches, both inland and at the shore. People can enjoy the out of doors. Take the swing bridge across the river to the Goodspeed Opera House, then to Gillette's Castle for the view. Ride the steam train in Essex with your children and your spouse, or hire a boat so you can fish for blues. There are 169 towns in Connecticut and thousands of sights along the way. So come and get acquainted with the Constitution State. In Connecticut, there's nothing far away. Relax in Stony Creek with a Thimble Islands cruise. Ride the carousel in New Haven's Lighthouse Park. Then climb East Rock to view the Elm City and the Sound. Take in a player dancing after dark. Traveling northward to Hartford, there are scores of sights to see. Historic homes from colonial days. Stopping at an orchard for a bushel or a pie, or have a drink right where the cider's made. Oh, the Capitol's magnificent, overlooking Bushnell Park, and the gold building glistens in the sun. The Wadsworth Athenaeum has such lovely works of art. See the old State House before your trip is done. Travel west to ride the rapids in a tube to get your thrills, or meander the roads of the Northwest. Enjoy the scenic splendor of those quiet Litchfield hills. In any season, it's New England at its best. How many towns? There are 169 towns in Connecticut and thousands of sights along the way. So come and get acquainted with the Constitution State. In Connecticut, there's nothing far away. Then take Route 8 south to where it meets I-95. In Bridgeport, you can visit Captain's Cove. That's where you'll find history that really comes alive aboard the restored HMS Rose. Oh, there's the Barnum House, and further south, learn about the Maritime. In Norwalk, where you can spend some time and some money. It's still a land of steady habits, but with a modern flair. If you doubt it, try to find Danbury Fair. It's a mall, so in the Berkshires and all along the Massachusetts line, from the suburbs of New York along the shore, from the border of Rhode Island, and in all the towns you'll find, Connecticut's more than just a corridor. Oh, there's so much so near to see and do, from the mountains to the shore. The bustle of today beside the quietude of yore. Pardon driving, rock and roll, the gospel and folklore. In Connecticut, it's always something more. There are 169 towns in Connecticut and thousands of sights along the way. So come and get acquainted with the Constitution State. In Connecticut, there's nothing far away. And you might like it, so you'll want to stay. Well, wrote that song in 1988, and it directly led to my being named the first official state troubadour. Troubadours go back to the time of the Crusades, probably 1100s or so, when I was just a boy. And actually, when I was a boy, the dinosaurs were grazing outside of my cave classroom. You'll get that later. This is time humor. And so I was asked to go to Philadelphia to participate in a state promotion on tourism here in Connecticut. And they asked me if I could actually there was a song that had many of these tourist attractions they were trying to promote. And of course there wasn't, so I wrote this one. And they liked it. And at the end of the performance, they said that was really good. They said that was so good, maybe we should have you as an official ambassador for the state of Connecticut. And I, having taught 8th graders, I tend to have a little flip attitude. And when they said that, be an ambassador, I said, well, I was hoping you'd make me the first official state troubadour. And you could tell that they liked the idea because, you know, when a bureaucrat gets an idea and they think they're going to go with it, you just let them go because it was their idea from that point on. And it actually happened. But it goes back even further to when I was a boy. I remember learning this song. It was written in the 1850s, called the Connecticut Peddler. The idea that we had for the tourism people was that we were promoting the state of Connecticut. So it was like one big commercial. They did their spiel, I did a song, I played a penny whistle, I played some spoons. And spoons, you say? Yes, spoons. I happen to have a pair right here. Spoons have been around since ancient Roman times. And my dad taught me how to play them when I was a boy. And people seem to be fascinated that you can play rhythm sounds out of a flatware. I call it the Flatware Fugue or the stainless sonata. Anyway, you can play them, just play them on your leg. And as we see commercials on TV now, you can see people doing all sorts of things, wearing flamboyant costumes, speaking really, really fast, and generally trying to get people's attention. And back in the day of the Connecticut Peddler, this is what folks did. They were like a moving flea market. They would walk around, they'd sell whatever stuff they had. I remember when I was a boy growing up in Middletown, we had a guy who came around once a year with a big old truck, and he was looking for rags. And he'd be singing out, he had an incredibly powerful voice. And I still can hear him, cash paid for rags. And everybody brought out their rags, and he took them, and then he sold them, and they made paper out of the rags. There was another guy who walked down the street, and he had a saw blade, and he had a long nail or a spike, and he'd be hitting this because he was a sharpening person. So he would sharpen your scissors, he would sharpen your saw blades, your lawnmower blades, and this was how he got attention. So the idea of being a peddler or a troubadour or a marketing person or someone who works for the state tourism board is that you're trying to get somebody's attention by being distinctive. So this is a song, and if you care to sing along, it's pretty simple. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy? That's the chorus. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy? Many goods have I in stock, so very many things, so very many things you never seen before, so very many things you never seen before. So listen while I name them o'er. Wooden wares, carpets for parlors and stairs, matches and Spanish cigars, articles splendid, I tell you. Here are tins, papers of needles and pins, tracts on unpopular sins, books about sinning, very popular, any of which I will sell you. And here is Thomsonian medicine, richest beyond all comparison, killing the seeds of diseases, appetite while it increases. Hot drops with strong composition will keep you in healthy condition. You'll never need a physician again. Want to help me? I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy again? I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy? Many goods have I in store, so very many things, so very many things you've never seen before, so very many things you've never seen before. So listen while I name them o'er. Here are combs, elegant brushes and brooms, made for the cleaning of rooms, furnished both smoothly and neatly. Here are knives, ribbons and silks for your wives, whistles and juice harps and fifes, on which your children play sweetly. And here are the seeds of asparagus, lettuce, beets, onions, and pepper grass from the United Societies. Seeds of all kinds and varieties. Shaving soap, excellent razor strops that will smoothly shave your chops. Swain's panacea and Jones drops too. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy? Last time I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler from Connecticut. I'm a peddler, I'm a peddler. Don't you want to buy? And there you go. So maybe you'll buy. Uniforms are distinctive, logos for advertising. We know a postman by his or her uniform, different from the UPS man or woman, different from the soldier, sailor, marine, from the policeman. Everybody has an identity. And we also know from music, like when there's martial music, military type music, it gets people stirred up. Signs on your lawn for a certain candidate. These are ways to identify you and who you like or don't. And so this is a song about, in Bloomfield, Connecticut, north of Hartford, there was a company called the Brown Drum Company. And they made, that was their family name, Brown. It wasn't the color of the drums. Maybe it was, but the family was Brown. And they were in some relation to John Brown, the abolitionist. So they're all those Browns were up there in that Torrington, Bloomfield, northern Connecticut area. So the Brown drums got us through the Revolutionary War, all the way up through the, probably close to the World War II. For ceremonial drums, I still are using them, and they're in a lot of private collections, Brown drums. And if you go to what's called the Wintonberry Green in Bloomfield, Wintonberry was like Windsor, Torrington, and what's the other one? I don't know. Can't remember the other one. Anyway, there were three towns and they formed Wintonberry. And so if you're on the Wintonberry Green, there is a bronze statue of a guy playing a drum. And I've played on that green, and they also used to have a drum festival. This is an Irish drum. It's known as a boron. That's not a moron, it's a boron with a B, but it's spelled B-O-D-H-R-A-N, like Bodran, and it's played with a double-headed stick. And to play this drum, oh, it's goat skin on the top. Goats hate these drums. So when you play it, you hold the stick like a pencil, and you have three things you can do with it. You can go down and back, and you can go in. Okay, so it's down, in, and back, and those are your three things. Of course, the fourth one would be not to do anything at all. Always an option. By putting your hand on the back of it, you can take out the ringing sound, the resonance. And so by moving your hand while you're beating it on the other side, you can change. You can hit the shell of the drum. Or just the shell. So I wrote this song about the Brown drums. There was one quote that I had read that the Brown drums were so superior as drums, they were equated with the Stradivarius violins. I know anyone who's a violinist would never say that a drum and a violin are equatable in any way, but that was actually the quote. So that I put that in the song. Hear the sound in the town made by drummers marching down. Rum-a-tum, rat-a-tat, flam-a-diddle. They were made in Bloomfield town by a family named Brown. Two drums, what Stradivarius is the fiddles. That's the chorus, probably a lot for you to join in, but give it a try. Hear the sound in the town made by drummers marching round. Rum-a-tum, rat-a-tat, flam-a-diddle. They They were made in Bloomfield town by a family named Brown. To drums of Stradivarius is the fiddle. Now you should know the Browns, they were tanners and coopers. So tanners worked with hides and coopers made barrels. So it's not much of a stretch. Well, it is really a stretch. If you stretch the hide over the barrel, then you got a drum. So you'll get that one later in the day too. It's a pulse, it's a cadence, pick 'em up and lay 'em down from the days of Nathan Hale and John Paul Jones. Fife and drum and bugle corps, in peacetime or in war, the thunder of a drum roll stirs our souls. Here we go. Hear the sound in the town made by drummers marching round. Rum-a-tum, round-a-top, flam-a-diddle. They were made in Bloomfield town by a family named Brown. To drums with Stradivarius is the fiddle. Browns were tenors, they were coopers, Eli, Moses, Ben, and Will, and their drums are generations to the fray. Hear the tramping of the feet, marching to the Brown drums beat. 200 years those drums have served the USA. Ready? Hear the sound in the town made by drummers marching round. Rum-a-tum, rat-a-tat, flam-a-diddle. They were made in Bloomfield town by a family named Brown. Two drums with Stradivarius is the fiddles. And today there may be seen on the Wintonbury Green a bronze drummer standing all alone. It celebrates the Browns and their drums of great renown, the finest drums this country's ever known. Hear the sound in the town made by drummers marching round. Rum-a-tum, rat-a-tat, flam-a-diddle. They were made in Bloomfield town by a family named Brown. Two drums with Stradivarius is the fiddle. Two drums with Stradivarius is the fiddle. Two drums with Stradivarius is the fiddle. There you go. And the beat goes on. Now, George Washington, you probably have heard of him. He gets a little press here and there. He was in the Oliver Ellsworth House in Windsor, Connecticut in 1789, and it is recorded in their records that he sang the song while he was there, because he was selling stuff too. George Washington was selling ambassadorships and selling Supreme Court positions. And there was no TV and there were no DVDs. And so after dinner, they would, play cards, they play games, they do charades, they would do magic tricks, they'd maybe do a gymnastics trick. Who knows what they did, but we know that George Washington sang this song. It's called Darby's Big Buck Ram. And for any of you, since it's a library audience, you probably are familiar with Clifford the Big Red Dog. Okay, enormous dog. Well, this ram was even bigger than Clifford the Big Red Dog. His legs would stand one on an acre of land. So it's a tall tale. It's classified as a liar song, actually, this sort of song, where they exaggerate something so much. And I always find it very interesting that the man who would never tell a lie sang on record a liar song here in Connecticut. And I have it on good authority that was the first and only time that a lie has ever been told by a politician in Connecticut. So this is truly a historic song, maybe hysteric as well. See, I got out of the Marine Corps. I went back to college and became an 8th grade teacher. And some of my students would come back after they got out of school of the 8th grade year. When they were 9th graders, they'd come back and they'd tell me that they had just gotten a joke that I had told them when they were in my 8th grade class. So I have hope that some of you will notify me that you got some of these jokes a little bit later too. The chorus to this song, I love songs with choruses because it brings people together. Which is especially good for this time, but any time. People have been singing chorus songs for forever. The chorus goes, wasn't he a big one, boys, now? Wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butcher cut him down. It's a nice song except for the ram. What are you gonna do? Darby had a big buck ram, and they used to say, he's the biggest ram, sir, that ever fed on hay. Here's the chorus. Wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? That ram, he had 4 legs to walk, he had 4 legs to stand, and every one of those legs, sir, covered an acre of land. Hey, wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? The wool that grew on that ram's back curled up to the sky. The eagles built their nest in it, and I heard the young ones cry. Hey, wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? The horns that grew on that ram's head curled up to the moon. A man climbed up in January and didn't come down till June. Hey, wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? The butcher man who cut that ram drowned it in the blood, and the little boy who held the bowl washed away in the flood. Hey, wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? Wasn't he a big one, boys? Now, wasn't he a big one, boys? Wasn't he a big one, boys, till the butchers cut him down? There you go. You might say that song could get your goat or your ram. Don't know how many of you might know that there was a colored regiment, African Americans, here in Connecticut. They were known as the 29th Colored Volunteer Infantry Regiment. They came out of New Haven. And I wrote this song back in 2004. What's that? A few years ago. Can't do the math. I was an English teacher. So after Lincoln did the Emancipation Proclamation, which came out in January of 1863, then African Americans were allowed to enlist in the Army. So this is an overview of what they did, and I had the great honor of singing at the dedication of the statue for them in Fairhaven back in 2008. It was always also amazing because earlier that year, I had also been at a dedication of a Civil War monument in Vicksburg, Mississippi to the Connecticut 9th, which was the Irish Regiment. So back in those days, people didn't want to give the Irish people or African American people weapons. They thought we might be dangerous. Anyway, we were, but it was to the enemy. So it's a great song. I was so honored to be part of the ceremony with those folks. At Grapevine Point in August 1863, colored men assembled voluntarily in the Fairhaven part of the Elm City to join the fight for justice and equality, the 29th. In 64, they sailed past the Mason-Dixon line to Camp Parole, then to Beaufort in South Carolina. At Bermuda 100, they first hit the firing line. Cool and brave, the regiment did mighty fine, the 29th. Here's the chorus. 1,600 African Americans, some whites and American Indians, a woman dressed as a soldier, now Connecticut 29th. In the summer's heat near Petersburg, they stood the test, entrenched as rebel forces tried to best the colored troops who held the ground, although hard-pressed until relieved from much-deserved new clothes and rest, the 29th. Reorganized organized as brigades within two larger corps. The 29th pressed on through 1864. At Calhoun, Virginia, many fell to wounds of war. Liberty was what they all were fighting for. The 29th. 1,600 African Americans, some whites and American Indians, and a woman dressed as a soldier, American Connecticut 29. The 29th had the most important fight in Fair Oaks, where they battled day and night, warding off Confederate men in might for 23 hours. They did the Union proud, all right, the 29th. On April 3rd, the year was 1865, the very first Federal Regiment to arrive, marching into Richmond and walking out alive, Connecticut men who helped the Union to survive the 29th. 1,600 African Americans, some whites and American Indians, and a woman dressed as a soldier, American Connecticut 29. Throughout the war and after, colored troops were shunned, their contributions overlooked, scant credit for the deeds they done. Discrimination based on race is our nation's shame. But now we know one gallant regiment by name, the 29th. 1,600 African Americans, some whites and American Indians, and a woman dressed as a soldier, American Connecticut 29. 1,600 African Americans, some whites and American Indians, and a woman dressed as a soldier man, for Connecticut 29. The 29th. There you go. That's it.
You could end now or do one more.
I have time for one more? I've got time.
Just do it.
All right. I'll end there because I don't want to hog up the time. If you want more, come check out my website. Cracker Barrel Entertainments. I thank you so much for having me here, and I'm going to enjoy what Carolyn does because I always do. Thank you so much, and thank you, Lauren and Rick.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So, in addition to being a Greenwich Library employee, I am also on the board of the Connecticut Storytelling Center. The center coordinates all the Tellabrations across the state of Connecticut and is a fundraiser for our group. We promote and preserve the living art of storytelling for everyone. We do this through Tellabrations, our annual storytelling festival at the end of each April, which went remote this year and will be doing so again in the coming, and through our schools programs for the littlest listeners, preschools and school-age children of all primary through high school grades, linking stories, pre-literacy skills, literacy skills, and curriculum. We encourage you, if you're interested in finding out more about what we do and where we do it, to go onto the Connecticut Storytelling Center's website at constorycenter.org. You can see links to other Tellabrations there, and also, if you care to donate to help fund our work. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it back off to Carolyn.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Greenwich Library, for hosting Tellabration 2020. So I'm pleased to be here, and I have a couple of favorite stories to share with you. We'll get to my Civil War image in my second story. So first, it was a cold winter day, the kind that makes you turn your collar up and pull your hat down over your ears and bend against the wind as you walk the city streets. Boston, with that cold wind off the harbor, can be terrible in a nor'easter storm. The flakes fell from the sky, big, fat, wet, heavy flakes, so that they would sit upon a wool coat and you would see their infinite patterns changing and then melting in, slowly soaking through until the bones chilled. Lowell Mason huddled up and hurried along as best he could in the hard underfooting slipping and sliding, but forcing himself through the storm until he reached the door at Andover Theological Seminary, the door to the office of his good friend, and he burst in with a gust of snowflakes and wind, and he slammed the door against the winter outside. And there his friend sat, huddled over a desk piled deep with dictionaries and Bibles and books and papers, and just covered with materials of study. He was deep in study. Samuel Francis Smith was there working that day by the flickering light of his lamp and was so engrossed in his work that he hadn't even noticed the wind howl outside his window. And he looked up startled at the entrance of his friend, cloaked in snowy wool clothing. Well, hello, and how are you? It's snowing. He was so taken aback. And his friend, there cradled in his arms, protected from the weather, held several books. He goes, I have these hymnals. Please, would you look at them? Some of them are in German. I don't speak German. You speak a lot of languages, but I was told to develop a song for the children to sing this year, a special song for the July 4th service. And I can't find a tune that children can sing that matches words that are appropriate. Would you do something with these? Well, Samuel was gifted with words of all kinds and in many languages. And he began to flip through the pages, and they had a conversation back and forth for a few minutes before that collar was pulled up and the hat hung low over his ears, and Lowell Mason went out. Samuel sat there pondering. Oh, some of these were too high for children to sing. Some had difficult rhythms. Some sounded so march-like. Some sounded like a dirge. No, not children's music. Page after page, flipping from one book then to the next and looking. There's got to be something here that children can carry the tune. Now, he's a good instructor and should be able to get them to sing this well if he could just find one in the right range. Now, here's a melody that could work, and it's lilting enough, not too high and not too low for the youthful voices. But the words will never do. He pulled some clean paper across his desk and picked up his pen, and he began to scratch some new words, thinking. He wasn't even seeing the snowstorm outside his window, but the words came down right after each other. They fell to the paper and the ink dried, and he looked it over and that'll do probably. And he thought he'd have to give it to his friend soon. And he stuck it in the page where the music was to go with it. And he put the stack books aside on his desk and went back to his work, and he burrowed in and he translated Greek and he translated Hebrew, and he worked and worked, and his desk became more covered with papers, and things came, other work, and piled on top of the previous until one day there was no room left to write. The whole desk was stacked deep in books and projects that he just couldn't work any longer. The seasons had turned, the winter had become a spring, and he was cleaning his desk finally. And putting aside all of these past projects, he came upon the stack of books from his friend. Oh, I've forgotten them all this time. I wonder when he was supposed to, I can't even remember. He flipped it open and saw his paper. Children's song, yes. Oh, he took the stack quickly and hurried out the door, and through the city streets of Boston he went until he went and found his friend, and he knocked on the door. I'm sorry, these are so late. They got lost in my desk, you know. And he did know, because he'd seen the desk many a time. It was a mess. And so he took the books. He goes, I wrote some words and they're tucked in there by the music. See if it's anything the children can do. I'm sorry I took so long, but there you go. And he was gone, off on his way, again, forgetting about it and back to his studies. And he poured himself into his work. And so the time went on from spring into summer, and he thought no more about it until one day a child arrived with an invitation in hand and knocked on his office door shyly and said, "This is Mr. Mason." And so he took the invitation and he opened it. And it was to the service where the children would perform this song he had written. And he thought, oh, I should do that. That would be good to hear. And I'd like to go. And so he kind of made a mental note to get there that day and went back to his work and buried himself amongst his books and languages and worked so hard. And the months turned over. Now, somewhere in that city, children were rehearsing and learning their lines and learning their notes and singing his words, but he didn't know anything of it. And finally, the day came, and he thought, now, when was that? What time? Oh, now. It's now. And he hurried to get there, hurrying through the streets of Boston on a holiday day and up to the Park Street Church. Its grand edifice and the big, huge steps, and he bound up there with the other crowd that was surging in, and every seat was taken, and people were filing around the edges to listen to their children sing on this day and to have an inspiring service. Oh, well, he would have to find a spot, but a small child appeared before him and took him by the hand and led him up the center aisle, where they had saved him a seat front and center to hear his words put to that music and to hear them sing. And soon the children filed in from the sides and lined up with their fresh cherubic faces and their rosy smiles, each searching the massive crowd for their mother or their father or grandparents or a school teacher, someone they wished would hear them sing. And Samuel sat there waiting. A great hush fell over the huge church. You couldn't even hear a whisper. The windows were cracked open to let a little bit of the air in. There were so many people inside, and they waited. And there was the last little bit of children wiggling and moving until they were all in place. And Lowell stood before them and raised his baton. And with a quiet downbeat, the children began. And their voices so sweet and innocent and full of promise. Samuel was swept away and even forgetting that those were words that he had crafted for their message. He thought children should sing this song always, and they have for so many years in public schools. It's not the fashion anymore. But those words of Samuel Francis Smith, oh, they rang that day in the Park Street Church at the top of Boston Common. And many of you will know them and recognize them. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where our fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Samuel Francis Smith, 1831. My country, 'tis of thee. I loved visiting that Park Street Church and standing there and looking in and imagining all those little faces. Oh, so many years ago, but so much is unchanged within those walls so that you could almost picture them beaming out at their parents and the music lifting from all those young voices. And what did they become? And who were they in the next few years as they grew to take Boston into a new century? Yes, those songs and those children, they launched something that every school child in our era sang in the morning before school. There were those few songs that we did every morning. They chose one. The PA music was never quite as good, but we learned them. And I wish that children today would continue to learn these songs of our history. Now for my second story, as you can see from my image, we're going back in time to the Civil War era. Adeline, where are you? Did you hear? Did you hear? They've declared war. There's going to be a civil war. Did you hear? They're enlisting men at the post office. They said post office here in Hartford. And Daniel and Edward were all excited. These two brothers worked with their sister Adeline at a place called The Retreat in Hartford. Well, nowadays they call it the Institute of Living, but it was The Retreat, a place for the rest, for those whose minds were wearied with life. And they were all working there, but those boys, well, when they heard there was going to be a war, they were going to enlist. And so the two of them left the retreat and hurried down the street to the post office because they were going to enlist today. But it wasn't at the post office. That was gossip that was wrong. And so they returned and they were puzzled and they asked around anyone who came and went, have you heard? Where are the enlistments being done? And finally, they learned the true location and off the brothers went again. Daniel, a couple years older than his young brother, Edward, who was 19 at the time, still a teenager for just a few more months, off they went and signed their name they did because they were going to fight in this war. Well, they were young boys. They had been farm boys. They were raised on Horse Hill in Ashford, Connecticut, out here in the quiet corner of northeast corner. Horse Hill had that great big house with the central door and all those windows that 16 children called home. So of course, these three had gone off to work and one brother was out in California and William had moved on up to New Hampshire and started a farm there, the oldest moving out and making way for the younger children to come in and help with the farm chores and do the work at home. But anytime they could, they made tracks to get back to Hartford. The stage rumbled over the route, bouncing along until they finally came to Ashford Center. And if the family didn't know they were coming, it was a long walk up to Horse Hill. But going home was always a good thing. The table always set, and mother never unhappy to have all her children at the table. It had been a long time, and now these boys were marching off to war. But first they needed to get outfitted, and they needed to drill and learn how to march and work as a unit and a team. And off they went. They were shipped down to New Haven. New Haven was where they were gathering them, and they were staying right there on the green, and they had tents, and people came with huge baskets of donuts and pies and goodies to feed these young soldiers. They marched up and down, at first with sticks until the guns were secured and their uniforms came and they looked sharp, this infantry unit. So many young faces, so many young men, many who come from the fields of farms scattered about Connecticut. Daniel and Edward stuck together like glue. They were going to go into this thing together and look out for each other. Mother had told them to do so, and off they went. Finally, their unit was ready to ship out, and the steamship Beauville sat there at New Haven Harbor. And they boarded ship. They boarded so many men. There was only a couple of guns on board, the kind like a cannon that could really fire against an enemy ship. And they worried, what do we do if we get to sea and we're caught or surrounded? What if they fire upon us? We're surely all going to go into the ocean. Now, being farm boys, they could swim, but not if you're way out there. He tried to keep those thoughts out of his mind. We're the army and we're going and we're strong. And there were horses on board and there was a brass band playing right on the deck as they left the city. And down they went, down the coastline, headed for Washington, D.C. And up the Potomac, when the tide turned, they sailed. Edward crouched under a shelter from the sun and scribbled a letter to Sister Adeline back at the retreat. President Lincoln came on board to inspect the new troops from Connecticut and said they were the best to arrive, most equipped and ready to go. And he was glad to see that they had everything they needed. As many arrived wearing what they wore in the fields and the farms at home and barefoot, and were not ready to be soldiers. Outfitting an army of the Potomac was a huge undertaking, but Connecticut did its part. These men arrived ready. But Edward was sure to note to Adeline that the president was so taken away with thoughts of the war and the soldiers that he came away without his well-known tall hat that day. He stepped on board the ship bareheaded. Imagine that, the leader of a nation. The letters continued from Adeline in Hartford down to the soldier brothers and back. And Daniel wasn't one for writing. He was never that kind of a student. He could make anything and do anything and had leadership qualities, but he was not a student. Now, Edward, they say Edward was the smartest child to ever pass through Ashford Academy. Not that the name isn't grand and all. It was a 2-story wood school with 2 front doors, boys and girls, upper grades upstairs and the small children down. And every year that Edward was there, oh, yes, he was the star pupil. He was a brilliant young man. And so Edward went on, and here he was writing all these letters. And then a little postscript would be a message from Daniel. Daniel well, and says to say hello to all. And that would be the message from the brother. But as long as he could write, Edward would tell the family, we're fine, we're both good, we're in good health, we have enough to eat, which they knew their mother would worry about. When Adeline had a couple days off, she would go home and could read the letters aloud to the family and share with them the news of these brothers. And hoping that they would cross paths with William, who had enlisted from New Hampshire and was in his own unit. Would they see each other? Could they find each other among the thousands of soldiers camped along the Potomac? And then there was George in California, serving out there in a fight that was so different from anything here in the East, but serving nonetheless. 4 brothers, terrible burden for a mother. But you know that war, it's going to be over in 3 months and everybody will be home. We're just going to whoop them Southerners and be done. Oh, those boys went off with all that bravado, but 3 months wore on, and they knew something for certain. This war would not be over in 3 months. They were mustered out of that infantry unit and they came home, and Edward and Daniel had a long talk. We're going to stick with this because it's right, but we're not going to walk the rest of this war. Their boots were worn through on the bottom from marching back and forth, and they hadn't even seen a winter yet. No, they would enlist in cavalry. They were going to ride this war, and they were farm boys. They could ride a horse. And so they enlisted in the 21st Cavalry, and it was attached to New York's Harris's Light Cavalry. It was a stunning unit of great riders and great bravery, and off they went to serve. Oh, 1861, there were so many battles and so many letters back and forth from Hartford to the soldier boys at war, back and forth until those days just before Thanksgiving, when everyone at Horse Hill was gathered around a great wooden crate as they carefully packed in fresh towels, soaps, pies, food, berries, fruit and vegetables from their gardens and orchards, everything that they could send to brothers serving in the war. It was carefully packed and padded, and the cover nailed down, and it was secure, and off it was going. And they shipped it and waited. And Edward wrote the letter the minute it arrived, and they had cracked open the wooden top and found mother's home cooking in there and gifts from siblings and letters. It was a grand feast to have and share, and they invited their best friends into their tent where they had such good times that day. Yes, it was a Thanksgiving to be grateful they were together and alive, and they were going through this war together as brothers. But the year went on, and there were so many battles and disheartening days when the losses mounted in the thousands. How could you wrap your head around losing so many of your brothers you'd marched with all those days? And the camps were quiet at night after a battle, but on other nights the music lifted into the darkness, and often you could hear the rebels across the river singing the same songs, and they would sing in a dual chorus either side of a river that was the dividing line between 2 armies, but not so far between cousins and brothers. The war went on that year, and they rode and they marched and they fought, and the winter came and the cold, a wind that Edward described as the coldest day ever since leaving Connecticut. Ice everywhere, frozen ground, 4 inches of snow that turned into a great sheet of ice, and such hard going. And here they were in canvas tents, government provided housing for the winter quarters. Mud oozing in. Well, country boys have a few tricks up their sleeve, and Daniel and Edward made a fireplace of stones and mud in their tent. And so this little mud fireplace, and they, along with every other soldier in the Army of the Potomac, took down every rail fence on every farm in the area. And then when they were burned up, the trees began to fall. And so it was that Edward said, when people return to their farms and their land and the war is gone from them, they will not recognize the place they stand, for the army has altered it so. There are roads where there never were. There is muddy bogs that are unpassable. There are no trees, nothing left, for it was all burned to keep soldiers from freezing in the night. And Edward writes home, "Dear Adeline, please send a knit cap of some sort to wear at night when I sleep, for my head is so cold." Yes, it was a bitter, bitter winter, and the ground that the soldiers laid upon was icy cold. And Edward reported that patriotism fades with the falling temperatures. Oh, doesn't it? It fades fast. And so they marched on and they got through that winter. And they were there to battle at the Rappahannock River with the rebel army across the way. You could see them across the way. And finally, the battle started. Edward and Daniel were there on the left flank. Well, they didn't get very much action. You never know which way an army's going to shift position and who's going to be called, but this day was not theirs to have the heavy losses. They waited for it to come their way, and it didn't, and they held their ground. But they knew Brother William was in the midst of it. And in the midst of it, the losses tallied up and tallied up, 10,000 that day. Where was William? It took 3 days to find him. And he was one of 60 to 70 in his regiment that survived. How lucky could brothers be? And that letter hurried off to get home to Connecticut to let them know, because the regular news travels much too fast for a mother and the heart waits. And so he wrote his letters home. And then they knew it would be a second Thanksgiving spent in quarters with the army. And so at home, again, the crate was prepared and everything packed in, special cooking and everything the family could put together and find to send those beloved brothers. And off it went, shipped out. And Thanksgiving came. And Edward wrote a letter to Adeline to pass the day. For it wasn't much of a day of celebration. It was cold and wet and miserable. And he had had a Thanksgiving feast. A feast, if you can call some liver and bacon, a little old, beans and salted horse meat and hardtack. And we all know the worms crawl through the hardtack. Oh yeah, that was Thanksgiving, for the crate was in some warehouse in Washington, D.C. and had not come to the army. And Edward feared all would be ruined by the time it did. And so when it was delivered and the lid pried off carefully, expecting the worst, that it was what they got. Not one thing was able to be salvaged from that crate of wonderful food and things from his home. Not one thing could be salvaged. A loss that hurt his heart more than anything, because they had all worked so hard to give for them. And so 2 Thanksgivings at war were gone, and on they marched. And it came a time at a battle at Aldie, Virginia, when that psh of a bullet whizzed by and Daniel fell beside his brother, killed instantly. But now Edward was no longer a farm boy of 19. He was a seasoned soldier and had come up in rank very quickly as soldiers passed on so fast in the army. The ones with any experience moved up. And when you're a colonel or a major, you can pull a few strings. And he took his brother home to Ashford by train, all embalmed, home to lie on the same hill where the family was, home to Ashford. It was a sorrowful trip and a chance for a mother to hug tight the living son and say her last farewell to that gone, and still 2 others she couldn't see. And so Edward had to leave the very next day and take the train back and get back to his unit. back to fighting, and he knew it was going to be so long yet. And they fought and they fought. And he came up in rank and up in rank. And when General Kilpatrick's wife passed away at West Point and he left, General Custer took that regiment and he was in charge. And Edward, his aide de camp. It was getting towards the end. Oh, they'd been everywhere, but what they wanted was to get to Richmond and free the prisoners of war there. What they wanted was Sherman to march on Atlanta and end this thing. But yet another Thanksgiving had to pass. But this time, being such a high-ranking officer, he was invited into a home in Maryland with a family, with children, and all the things like his mother would spread on a table. What a contrast to eating salt horse and hardtack was this feast this family shared with these officers. And the soldiers in some units, well, they had turkeys that had been shipped in for just that occasion. Not every unit was able to get that. Some were too far out, but they did the best they could at feeding a Thanksgiving to those who were giving thanks and giving us a nation. They went on fighting, marching out of one Thanksgiving and into a new year. More cold winter nights with a hat pulled down and that thin wool blanket wrapped around them, sleeping fully dressed in their uniform, ready to fight in a minute if it should happen. Sitting along the edges of rivers whose ice flows drifted by, just thinking of home, the hearth and the fire, the family and the warm voices, the friends he had left at work, and how lonely it was without sharing a tent with a brother who'd come so far with him, but must go on, must continue, and yet another Thanksgiving. And so they passed yet one more Thanksgiving together, these soldiers of the army. But the spring came, the spring. And Edward, mounted on a fiery steed they'd taken from the Confederate soldiers they captured, had raced out in the night with a group of 300 soldiers. They were after the notorious Harry Gilmore, and gallop they did, some 60 miles round trip. They knew where he was. They'd gotten intelligence to where he was camped, and they took that bushwhacker by surprise in his nightwear. And they captured everything in their camp and brought them all back. Edward capturing the famous Harry Gilmore. Edward had his pick of saddles and horses from that capture. So many fine horses, and he needed good ones. They wore them out left and right. And so he entered the final phase of this war, knowing it had to end soon because the men couldn't stand up much longer. They had to go home. This year, they had to be home for Thanksgiving. With whomever was left, they had to go home. But it was spring, and they rode up to the battleground at a place called Appomattox. General Custer was the general of the field that day, and they sat on their horses at the back, and the soldiers lined in front of them, the sunlight glinting on their weapons, and across the field, just a short distance you could shout across, was the Confederate Army, each wishing this to be the final battle. But it was then that a soldier came galloping onto the field with a white towel, and he came riding across. And he said that General Lee wanted to offer his surrender. And Custer looked around and he said, Whitaker, Edward, go with this man across and receive the surrender from General Lee. And so the two, with that white towel pierced on a gun, held higher a sword, rode across the field with thousands of guns aimed at them. But every man, either side, just wishing one thing. Let it be over. Let us go home. Couldn't we just have home? I just want to go home. And so he rode across, but General Lee was no longer there. He had been spirited away by his troops to protect him. They so feared what the Union Army would do to their leader. General Longstreet offered the unconditional surrender of the Army of Virginia. And Edward accepted that and galloped back to General Custer to report such. And soon there was signing of papers and people gathered round and newsmen everywhere carrying the story. He knew the story would get home before his letter to Adeline and to his parents. It's over. I'll be coming home. I'll be home for Thanksgiving. He was so grateful. Oh, they'd had a Thanksgiving when George had come from California without him. And it was a great reunion that he had missed because he could not get away. But this time he would be home with family. And so Edward passed his final days. And finally, when the war was fully over, the Army had a grand parade in Washington, D.C., a city he had explored from one end to the other, from the very bottom to the tippity top of the Capitol dome, since there was nobody working on it during the war and it was totally scaffolded. Edward was there at the front of that long parade. He and all the other generals, breveted Brigadier General Edward Whitaker, age 23, a boy by so many standards, but for what he had experienced on those battlefields, he was a warrior man and a brilliant young man. He was asked to continue on, but no, he couldn't go on with the war. You see, at the Battle of Five Forks, when he had jumped the enemy line on his horse and gone and galloped and jumped right over them, the horse had landed on unsure footing and tumbled down, falling on Edward's leg. It was probably broken in there, the boot filled with blood. He dare not take it off for days. It was right before Appomattox. He still had a very bad limp, and the leg would take a long time to heal, but he would always use a cane. But it was nothing. But he wouldn't go on and continue a career in the Army. He couldn't ride like he had, not with a leg like that. No, the Army was not for him. And he did get to go home and visit and enjoy everything a family has on a long table stretched out for so many siblings and now grandchildren. Oh, Horse Hill had never seen a celebration in Ashford. You would have heard them across the town. What a time to come home and celebrate this young man who'd won the 5th Congressional Medal of Honor, this farm boy, done their family and their country proud. He returned after a bit and a visit to Washington, D.C., and was named the superintendent of the final construction of the Capitol Dome. And then Grant named him Postmaster General of Hartford, and he worked so close to Adeline. And later, he became a patent lawyer in Washington, D.C. Edward Whitaker was the smartest boy ever to attend Ashford Academy, and he continued to prove himself his entire life. And there was never a Thanksgiving that Edward didn't sit at a table on Horse Hill in the old family homestead and say his thanks that they had won that war and that he was home with his family, grateful for the food they had before him and those who could gather with them. General Edward Whitaker, a true Connecticut hero.
Wow, thank you so much, Carolyn. And thank you, Tom. What an incredible Tellabration celebration. I really want to thank our great audience for joining us. Thank you again to our storytellers.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you so much. Tom Callinan, Carolyn Stearns. Also a big thank you to Ann Shapiro, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Storytelling Center. Hey, and we can't forget our wonderful programming librarian, Lauren Mendoza. Thank you also for your help. Hey, well, we appreciate all of your storytelling, everybody, during this Tellabration 2020. And this was especially nice while many of us are at home more and more. And as we head into the holiday season, so I really want to thank everybody. We don't have any questions coming in, so I'll just give you an opportunity to say thanks and goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren, Ann, and Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Tom.
And thank
My
you so
pleasure.
much, everybody. What a great weekend.
Thank
Happy
you, Richard.
Tellabration.
Happy
Thank you, Rick.
Thanksgiving.
Okay, bye-bye,
Rick.
everybody.
Have a good day.